This play is a classic because of the way that it underlines our relationship to nature and how that will be the thing that would set you free.
This is a classic because it is a poetic, allegorical masterpiece.
This is a classic because it's gay.
That's it. We don't need to say any more. What else do you need?
This is our history. This is our legacy.
Hello, and welcome to This is a Classic, the Expand the Canon Theater Podcast. We're your hosts.
Sky, she, her pronouns. I'm a curator for Expand the Canon and an ensemble member.
And me. I'm Gagarin, pronouns they, them, also a curator for Expand the Canon and an ensemble member here at Hedgepig.
Expand the Canon is a program of Hedgepig Ensemble, a Brooklyn-based theater company that reimagines the classics, creating a legacy of storytelling with gender equity at its core.
Oh, yes. And Sky, today I am elated because we are going to be talking about Portillo-Trambley's Day of the Swallows
Hey!
from the Expand the Canon list that is available at expandthecanon.com. And if you were to feel kind of cookie crazy and go to that website, which you should do, you would find this pitch.
If you're looking for a lush, poetic drama with a powerhouse queer heroine and an intersectional view of indigeneity, consider this moving piece from an eminent Chicana dramatist. Josefa is a pillar of her rural community, unflappable, benevolent, formidable, respected. Why, then, is there a fresh bloodstain on her floor? As the rest of the village women gather for a ritual to find husbands, Josefa is trapped in her house, frantically trying to prevent her secret from being revealed. This play is a harrowing, verdant exploration of the creation and keeping of a queer utopia, and what it costs to protect it. Capturing the poetry and cultural interrogation of Tennessee Williams with a distinctly feminist viewpoint, Day of the Swallows examines the secrets we're forced to keep and the lengths we go to hide them.
So, Sky, do you want to know what happens?
I would love nothing more than for you to tell me what happens in this play, Gagarin.
Okay, amazing. So basically, this play occurs in 3 acts over the course of one day. And Act 1 is just the morning. We open on the day before the San Lorenzo Festival, which is a festival that is named for the village because it's also named the village of San Lorenzo. And this is an event where all the unmarried women of the barrio or the neighborhood process from the church to the lake, and then they bathe in the lake, preparing themselves for a heavenly marriage and to get good husbands.
That's the vibe.
That's the vibe. That's what everyone's getting ready for. Everyone's very excited. So at curtain rise, it is daybreak, and Alicea, who is Josefa's ward, is cleaning the floor very frantically. She's cleaning blood off of the floor, and she hides a bloody knife in a side table when Clemencia arrives to deliver their milk for a day, who is just another member of the village. Clemencia kind of notices that something's up with Alicea, that she doesn't look totally great, but basically just instead starts talking to her about how great Josefa is and how much everyone loves her. Alicea is like, yeah, she's totally great, love her too.
And Josefa is like this sort of guardian character. It's revealed that like she clearly has a reputation for like taking people in.
Yes, and that's part of the reason why everyone is so obsessed with her and thinks that she's so great. Because she is. It is. She's doing good things for the community and for people who are in bad situations. But we're going to get more into that. Then Josefa shows up, and so while Alicea goes off stage, Tomas, who is Josefa's uncle, shows up. And he basically shows up being drunk, creepy, and asking her for money. And he notices the pail of water that Alicea was cleaning the floor with, and he's like, that looks a lot like blood. And Josefa glides right over this and instead is like, just take some food and leave because I don't like you. which he does with a little bit of grumbling. And then Alicea comes back and she starts prepping for her boo flirt crush, Eduardo, to come around because they go on a walk every day. And Josefa's like, hey, what if instead of going on your walk, you two come in and we all have coffee together? And this is really exciting for Alicea because Eduardo has been wanting to meet Josefa. But before she can go about getting the rest of the stuff ready for them all to have breakfast together, Josefa's like, hey, listen, we need to talk about last night. Ooh, what happened last night? We don't get that much information at this point in the play, but Josefa says that she took David, who is basically her other ward live-in adoptee. She says that she took David to the hospital and that everyone at the hospital believes her story, that when she told them all that someone broke in and that David's going to be okay, which Alicea is like, he's definitely not going to be okay. You killed him. And
Dun, dun,
Josefa's like,
dun.
no, that's not what happened. He's going to be totally fine. Which we are more inclined, I would say, as like the audience and the readers to believe Josefa at this point that David is fine because Alicea is very much not emotionally stable for pretty much the entire play.
Yeah, and Josefa is like being presented very much as this sort of like put together person, pillar of the community, has her life together, she's kind, she can hold her own. She's a very like pragmatic, smart character.
Yeah, unflappable is really a good descriptor of her. She doesn't shake easily. So Alicea goes off to take another breather moment, and Josefa has a moment that she has several of these moments throughout the play where her living room is described as having a lot of light coming through it, and basically like her entire house is gorgeous. Like everyone agrees that Josefa has the most beautiful house and garden out of anybody in the entire barrio. There's all this light coming in that filters through these trees that have all of these birdhouses that all these swallows stay in. And Josefa has a lot of moments with the light that get really sexy in a way that I think we could talk about more when we get into themes and stuff. So anyway, Josefa has her sexy moment with the light, and then Eduardo shows up. She kind of goes off, and Eduardo starts talking to Alicea about how they want to run away together and live off the grid because Eduardo is a native and is like, we can live off the land. We don't have to live in the barrio. And Alicea is super down to run away with Eduardo and go live in the mountains. But she says that she doesn't want to get married to him until they're both super, super sure. And to help explain why she feels this way, she begins to tell Eduardo the story of how Josefa came to be her caretaker and basically saved her from being sex trafficked and what was like a really, really awful situation. And that Josefa basically like busted her out of there Die Hard style by beating the shit out of one of the pimps.
We're laughing, but that is what happens.
That is exactly what happens. I will say Eduardo does not do a good job at all of listening to Alicea about this because she's telling him this whole thing and he's kind of like, whatever. And then she gets to the end of the story and he's like, okay, let's get married right now. And it's like, did you hear anything she just said to you? Like,
there's a lot of men not listening to women in this play.
Oh, yeah. So Alicea tells him this whole story and is like, but listen, there's also something else you need to know. She's about to spill the beans on what happened last night when Josefa enters. Then Alicea is like, I gotta go run some errands. So she leaves. Josefa confronts Eduardo about his feelings for Alicea. They kind of get into it, and then they also then start kind of like flirting, which gets kind of hot and heavy. And then Alicea comes back. This is when we get our first discussion about the magicians.
Capital M magicians.
Capital M magicians, which is another thing we hear about a lot throughout this play. And it's not really explained what they are, because also Josefa's talking about it is very abstract. But basically she says that like one day she refused to go to bathe with the virgins on the day of San Lorenzo, but she watched them all bathe in the lake from the woods and became so overwhelmed with desire that she basically started talking to nature and says that the light began to speak to her and endowed her with a kind of magic.
When you down so bad, you become a magician.
You literally become a nature magician. And the thing is that also, as she's like telling this story, both Eduardo and Alicea are like, oh, this is totally legit. So they're all having this magical moment together. And then who shows up but Tomas comes back again, like basically screaming at them through the window that he's found David's horse just like out and wandering about. Which causes Alicea to freak out again. So she and Eduardo go for a walk. And Tomas comes in and he and Josefa have another chat where he's continuing to be really creepy, and he's being especially weird about Josefa's story about the break-in. He's like, really interesting how all these men keep ending up super injured around you. And she's like, leave my house, which he doesn't really do. And then she leaves. So he's in the living room by himself. I don't know why she does this, but she leaves him alone in the living room, and he basically starts going through all of their drawers. And then we fast forward a few hours. The next person to show up at the house is Clara, who is Eduardo's ex, notably. And she's currently married to the owner of the hacienda, which is like, I would say, the larger businessman who kind of owns all of the land that the barrio is based on. And she's shown up to get fitted for a dress that Josefa has made for her.
Josefa, we should say, is a seamstress, and she makes lace, and there's all this like
Yes,
beautiful descriptions of the lace that she makes, and there's a lot of references to clever fingers. I will just put that out there.
So Alicea is doing the fitting of the dress, and Clara starts asking her about Eduardo, which is clearly a bad idea because Alicea is like, oh, we're super in love, because she has no idea about Clara's relationship with Eduardo. When Alicea leaves to get some other stuff for the dress, we see that Clara is drinking on the sly out of a little flask in her purse, and Josefa catches her and is like, hey, please stop. I've asked you to like take care of yourself, and I want this, like, I want you to be well. And Clara's like, yeah, sure, of course I'll take care of myself. And then
yeah,
the scene,
like clearly a recurrent problem kind of thing.
Clearly she's got some big issues with Eduardo and also with drinking. But so that scene ends, and we are into Act 2 in the afternoon. That was all in one morning, if you can believe that. So at the top of Act 2, Josefa and Alicea heal a wounded sparrow that has flown into their house, and the events of last night come up again. But Josefa is so busy stroking Alicea's hair and talking about how pretty she is that she's like, oh, I totally forgot about that, which makes Alicea freak out. Like, how could you forget about what's happened? And Josefa, she doesn't say that, oh, it's a trauma response, but she's like, oh, I just take nasty things and I put them in a little box and I don't think about them. And it's like, word.
Oh, girl.
So Alicea goes to get the knife to like show it to Josefa to be like, you don't remember last night? Here's literally the bloody knife. And then when she cannot find it, she freaks out. And then she freaks out even more when she realizes that their money box is missing. And Josefa is immediately like, oh, Tomas definitely took it. And now we're all kind of in trouble. And then who shows up but Tomas again? And this time he is very drunk, and he's making really weird comments to Josefa again. And Alicea starts crying. And as Josefa's like gearing up to duke it out with Tomas, Don Esquinas, who is the owner of the hacienda and Clara's husband, shows up, and he's in a full-on rage because Clara has had a full mental breakdown and he has to take her to a sanatorium. And Josefa's like, your wife had a breakdown because you don't love her. And the Don isn't really hearing any of that, and instead like, no, she's crazy because you let her drink. Now you can't ever see her again.
Josefa's like also points out the fact that like it's not only that he doesn't love her, it's that he's like cheating on her all the time.
Yes.
In front of her face in like very blatant ways. And when Josefa challenges him on this, he's like, oh, that's how men are. Man's gotta be like, it's bad.
So that's not good. And he basically just leaves on that note of like, my wife is crazy, but I should be allowed to do whatever I want. So after he leaves, Tomas tries to blackmail Josefa again, saying that he's got a big trump card on her, in that he saw her and it's inferred Alicea running around in the woods together. on the day of last year's Feast of San Lorenzo.
Oop.
It clearly kind of hits a nerve with her, but she doesn't let it up to the surface. And eventually Tomas just leaves and is like, I'm gonna get you. And
I'm gonna get ya.
and she's like, I think I have bigger fish to fry right now. So he leaves, and Alicia comes back in and tells Josefa that she's gonna leave. And Josefa's like, okay, cool, to like go visit David. And Alicia is like, no, I'm gonna go run away with Eduardo, and I'm gonna go do it right now, which is really upsetting to Josefa. She tries to convince Alicia to stay, and she's warning her that, like, no, he's just gonna cheat on you. You know, he's just gonna do the thing that all men do, and he's gonna treat you horribly. But Alicia is like, no, he's not gonna do that, and I'm leaving anyway. Josefa lets her go, actually, and only asks that Alicia send their local priest, Father Prado, to come and see Josefa, since she's not going to be able to make it to church tonight before she and him have to basically lead this whole festival day the next day. Then we get into Act 3, nighttime. Father Prado has come to visit Josefa. She immediately asks him to take her confession. And this is when we get all of the tea of everything that happened the night before. So, Josefa reveals to the father that she and Alicia have been lovers for a little over a year. That's the first bomb that she drops, that they're lesbians.
Surprise.
Uh-oh, you totally never saw it coming.
Oop.
Whoop. So herself, Alicia, and David were building the big birdhouse that is now in her backyard, and they had just finished it. And Josefa sent David to bed because presumably he is younger. The play doesn't really give context on his age, but my assumption was that he was probably a younger boy, certainly. So
that's interesting. I read him as a little older.
Ooh, okay. So Josefa sends David to bed, but he sneaks up on Josefa and Alicia doing, to directly quote the text, something. I think we can all infer what that something is. Because Josefa freaks out and makes Alicia hold David down while she cuts his tongue out so he can't tell anyone what it was he saw. Dun dun dun.
This is the first time we hear like what has actually happened to David. I think we've inferred at this point that like Josefa and Alicia clearly did something to him, but this is the first time it is actually revealed what that something is.
Yeah, certainly shocking, and is very shocking to the father. And Josefa is basically like, I don't have any guilt about this. She's like, I feel awful for what I did to David, and like, I will do everything I can to provide for him and to make sure that he has a good life. She was like, but I feel no guilt for what I did to protect my life.
And Alicia's.
That's very true as well. So the father forgives her, and then he leaves. And our next scene takes place on the morning of the day of the San Lorenzo festival. And Josefa is in her house by herself, and she's laying out a bunch of stuff for the people of the community, including some really gorgeous lace that she has basically spent the entire play finishing. And then she calls out to the lake and exits the stage. So then the house is kind of empty, and Clemencia returns, and she's looking for Josefa because everyone is waiting for her to lead the procession. And then Clemencia looks out the window to the lake and is like, oh, how funny. There's a body floating on the lake. That seems weird. And she leaves the house to go to the procession since things have got to get rolling. And after she leaves, the stage directions speak of an almost unearthly light suddenly flooding the room.
The light.
The light, the light. Is it Josefa? We are inferring.
It's something.
Yeah, so that is Day of the Swallows.
Legacy.
Before we like fully dive into themes, Sky, I did want to read a little passage from the very beginning of the play because I feel like that will help to prime us mentally for the themes, because I think they all kind of come out in this passage.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opening stage directions from the very, very beginning of the play before we even hit Act 1. So, the Tierra of Lagos de San Lorenzo is within memory of mountain sweet pine. Then the maguey thickens with the ferocity of chaotic existence. Here the desert yawns. Here it drinks the sun in madness. The village of Lago de San Lorenzo is a stepchild. It is a stepchild to the Esquinas hacienda, for the hacienda has been a frugal mother and a demanding father. Its name comes from the yearly ritual of the Saint Day of San Lorenzo, when all the young women gather around the lake to wash their hair and bathe in promise of a future husband. The tempo of life, unbroken, conditioned, flavors its heartbeats with dreams and myths. The hacienda is the fiber upon which existence hangs. The church, the fluid rose, assures the promise of Elysium fields. No one dares ask for life. What is this footfall beyond ritual, beyond livelihood? What is this faint, unknown ache in the heart? It is more than just the rasp of hope. The young know this, and they go to the spring with lyrical intimacy. By the lake, eyes burn and feet dig in the mud of the spring. Someone traces mountain against sky, and gulf expands, drowning, drowning. The obligation is remembered back in the village. The toll of the church bell offering sanctuary is a relief. The lake becomes too much for them. At daybreak, the fiesta day is sanctified with a misa at sunrise. The choir rejoices the promise of the day. A holy procession is led by the priest and an honored member of the church. Offerings to the patron saint are generous amidst frugality. The animals are blessed, the people are blessed, all is washed clean. Perhaps, secretly, each villager senses the werewolf moon inside him. The bite into passions will be hard and fierce after sunset. On the day of San Lorenzo, in the heat of July, everybody goes to the lake. This day, the lake is invaded by village life. When the church bells toll 11 in the sun, the late morning is the sole witness to the bathing of the virgins. The lake becomes a sacred temple. The high priestess talks of hopes, lovers, and promises. In earnest belief, they wash their hair in spring water to ensure future marriages in heaven. It is true, no one has seen a marriage made in heaven, but each girl hugs the private truth that hers will be the one.
So beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I feel like basically this like chunk of text is like you want all of the themes and all the things that this play is wondering
Mhm.
about encapsulated in a little bit of poetry. There you go.
The thing that I love so much about that passage and also the play is there's like just this real sensuality to it all.
Mm,
It's very sexy and like at times like it is overtly sexual, but at times also it is just like sensual, which I
mm.
think is also like what she's sort of playing with are the themes of, you know, the dichotomy of religion and indigenous traditions and the city and the rural and masculinity and femininity. But she's equating a lot of sexuality and desire and hope and desire for community and desire for peace with like these very natural themes,
Yes.
which are both really raw and really gentle. It's like there is this sort of wild passion to some of it, but there's also like this real gentleness of like light and taking care of birds. You know
Yeah.
what I
Well,
mean?
it's interesting because I think even within that, it's very much about paradoxes and things being able to exist inside of each
Mm-hmm.
other because the light and all of that is so gentle, but at the same time, they experience this freedom and a level of presence within yourself that
Mm-hmm.
is violent. And I think of, especially of Clara, when they talk about her mental breakdown, they were like, she's in the dark and she's like slashing and destroying everything. And
Mm.
Josefa is like, oh, it's because the magicians couldn't come to her. But Clara says that she was seeing the magicians, but that they had no face, which I think within her own self and within her own character, she was like unable to accept or take on like that true internal self of whatever was happening for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the idea of this sort of like nameless self
Mm.
because I think that's the thing that I really love in this play. It's obviously a very queer play in what happens, but it's also like dealing with sort of queerness as this nameless thing.
Yeah, it's about the true inner human self that can be fully
Yeah.
present with nature, and that true human self is inherently queer
Hmm.
and is, like, inherently going to be wild and gentle and, you know, loving, but also hateful and violent.
That's exactly what I mean is like by sort of not putting a name or a label to some of these relationships or feelings that these characters are
Mhm.
experiencing. Part of that is, you know, there isn't words for a thing that society condemns, or there isn't, you don't want to call a thing what it is because society might condemn it. But also, there is this thing of like naming this boundless thing inherently restricts it.
Yeah.
And the sort of the way sort of like Josefa has these beautiful monologues where she talks about like overwhelming feelings that she has
Mhm.
when she like first saw the other women and realized she was attracted to them, and then like her experience of like her sexuality being tied to like nature. It defies a neat label, and that's not to be like reductive of labels. It just means that like she's like trying very tenuously to exist with this very expansive way of life,
Mhm.
because the moment the world takes notice of that, the world doesn't like it.
Well, I would even say beyond that, I don't think it's reductive at all. I think it's in fact so progressive. Like Josefa never labels herself as gay. She never
Mhm.
like says at any point in the play like I am gay and I like women. It's that she only
Mhm.
ever describes these intensive feelings of desire and want and lust that like she knows when she's existing in a perfect world and she knows how to be able to achieve it at least for herself because this like expansive transgressive ideal Josefa is trying to exist in and that the men of the barrio along with
Mhm.
Tomas and the Don are trying to constantly cut down and contain. It's interesting because I also see a lot of hypocrisy in Josefa because she's very much so like railing against the men in the play and how
Mhm.
all you men are the same and all you want to do is take, take, take. You know, your love is a violence. But Josefa herself, as we mentioned earlier, is not a person without violence
Mhm.
and is also very much a person centered around control.
Mhm.
Even just in like the plot directions, that's constantly her telling Alisea to go do this, her telling someone to go do that, and people just do what she tells them to. I think the main difference between Josefa and these men is that when people try to step out beyond her control, she doesn't necessarily try to stop them. Like when I think it's like a really beautiful telling about how when Alisea says that she's going to leave, there's not like a big, long, drawn out, oh no, please don't leave me scene. It's like Josefa clearly doesn't want her to go, but
Mhm.
she never escalates to a point of violence to tell her not to go. She only is ever like, we have a perfect world here. And if you leave, you're going to risk yourself to violence and heartache and going
Yeah.
back to basically where you were, which I think is also interesting given that Josefa commits suicide at the end of the play by drowning herself in the lake.
Yeah. So there's also like a lot of this play that is like so much about like trauma to me,
Mm,
because this is a play that is very violent towards women in a lot of ways.
hmm.
There's a lot of these characters have survived domestic abuse or sex trafficking, or they're at the very least like the men do not treat women well in this play
Yeah.
generally. So while there's like a lot of Josefa's attitudes towards men generally that like we can be sympathetic to, she's also like not to be reductive, but like hates men. Like that is,
Oh,
she
yeah.
says that basically. Like
Oh,
it,
yeah.
which I think also like is illuminating about the act of violence that she is able to commit at the end of the play.
Hmm.
But I think so much of this like is also about trauma. Like for Aliseo, somebody who was quite literally almost sex trafficked, and the experience of that and the experience of having a patriarchal society, a very capitalist society that is sort of treating you in that way, and then the contrast of then going to a place that is more peaceful, at least at first glance, that is like very feminine, that is very filled with light, is like that's a deliberate contrast that
Mm-hmm.
is set up in this play of like everything about Josefa's house is like antithetical to what she says about her experiences of men. She describes men generally as like being violent and aggressive and hard and all these
Yeah.
things. And then everything about all the stage directions about her house and everything is that it's filled with light. There's lace
And
everywhere.
even Eduardo, when he shows up for the first time, he's like, "Oh, this is clearly a woman's house." And Lisa is like,
Yeah.
"What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Look at the place."
Yeah. And so there is this putting femininity on a pedestal in that way as this sort of like
Mm-hmm.
safe haven. And also there's something that feels very political of I'm going to drown myself in this place where all these young women are about to bathe naked in to like find husbands.
Yeah,
Feels pointed at the very least.
truly. Because if you want to come back to then also the beginning passage where there's that bit where these girls believe that they're gonna get to be the one who will be special and who will be the one who will find a man that will love them entirely for who they are and be able to lead happy lives. And I think Josefa is like the only person in this play who's like categorically, irrevocably, that's not true.
There's also it's interesting. I'm just sort of catching that now of like there's sort of a sort of naive romanticism, which is like how I'd been reading it of like, oh, the women are going to like bathe for husbands. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also like a really desperation in that of like or there's a read on it that is oh, they're hoping for their Prince Charmings. And then there's a read on it is like they're hoping for a man who doesn't like beat them. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's there's a read on it that all you want is a good man of like the bar is so low of just somebody who will be kind to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which we see very little of in the men in this play. So like, girl, I get it.
Yeah, girl.
If that's your model.
Like, honestly, if you were also living in this village your whole life, I too would be like, don't fuck with any of these guys. Are you crazy?
Time to start a commune.
Yeah, I'm gonna start my own lesbian commune. But so on that note, the one thing that we haven't spoken about, our little semi-genderless friend, who we didn't talk about that much during plot, which is kind of crazy of me to not bring it up that much because it's almost at least once a scene they come up. The magicians.
Oh my god. What do you think the magicians are?
Okay, so after rereading it several times, I think it is a literal incarnation of the spirit of the land. And I think Josefa is special in that she is able to commune with the land as a result of her queerness because she is someone who is fully at peace with, to quote that opening passage again, like the werewolf inside herself, which is
Mm-hmm.
also in itself like a famously queer metaphor, the werewolf, the thing that you turn into, the inner monster,
Mm-hmm.
that she is like present with that within herself that allows her to be able to express this magical level of connection to nature and to beauty. And I think that's why she's always like, oh, the magicians will come to you and you will also be able to achieve this level of enlightenment. But everyone else in the play, I mean, I think especially the women in the play are deeply terrified by that and deeply unsettled by it because it's a level of, like, I would say enlightenment that I think also requires them to acknowledge the horrors of the world around them, because you can't have enlightenment without knowing the truth of the place in which you live.
No, I mean, I agree. I think the magicians also are like a pretty broad metaphor. I don't think that there
Hmm.
is like a one to one, like, and the magicians are God. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's a little broader
100%.
than that. I think you're right that it is sort of like this embodiment of some sort of spiritual connection to the earth and to sensuality and all of that. And in that vein, like, I don't think that they are necessarily a sentient force. I don't think that they are necessarily a neutral force either. Like, they're just
Mm.
sort of the earth has its own agenda kind of thing,
Hmm.
and it that is neither good nor bad. It just sort of it is what it is.
Yeah.
I think they're like a really compelling metaphor
Mm.
It's very evocative.
Yeah.
And I think leaves a lot of room for whoever is working on this to interpret how
Oh,
they wish.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When you produce this play,
When?
when you produce this play, there's certainly so much you can do on that. Because, like, Josefa's relationship with the magicians, they're sort of like, I would say she's their most like one-to-one straight connect. But like we mentioned earlier, both Alicea and Clara, who are the only other people in the play who really mention their interactions with the magicians, it being this kind of level of awakening and enlightenment, is that like right before Alicea leaves to go run away with Eduardo, Josefa is like, one day the magicians will come to you and you'll understand. And Alicea is like, I don't want them to come to me anymore. I think that's in part because she's sort of choosing to accept this fantasy that herself and Eduardo will be happy and will be able to live in the mountains and they'll be totally fine, just live in their own perfect fantasy. And then I think for Clara, when she talks about the magicians having no face in the midst of her breakdown, I think it's partially that like she has been visited by this force and is in herself awakened to the horror of the world that she's living in, but she doesn't have the ability to transcend and escape it in the way that Josefa does because she can't accept it.
Hmm.
That's my thought about the magicians. I've been thinking about them a lot. That's my take on it. If you're a producer listening to this podcast, it doesn't have to be that. I would be very, very curious to see what someone who is coming from this theatrical background and who is a Latin theater maker and would probably have other opinions about this that I might not have perspective on.
Do this play.
Do this play. Please do this play.
History.
Should we talk about the lovely gal who wrote this?
Yes, let's talk about our gal.
So Estela was born on January 16th, 1926. A fellow Capricorn. Incredible.
Work.
So she developed an early love for literature in high school, and she married Robert Tremblay shortly after she graduated. They had 6 children together over the course of her life. And in 1956, she graduated from what is now known as University of Texas at El Paso. Hook 'em horns.
Oh my God.
Way to go, guys. And then she graduated and became a English teacher for public schools and in high schools. She took a 2-year break from teaching in 1972 to host a talk show.
Oh my God.
Stella Says.
That's so good. I wonder if you could listen to it. I wonder like if there are episodes.
Oh, so now I know what my new podcast is going to be. I bet you she had thoughts. I bet she had thoughts about a lot of stuff.
Stella Says.
Stella Says. It says that the show's content was wide-reaching and frequently addressing political and controversial matters of the time.
Oh my God, I
And as a
literally
result of
want to
this,
read it.
she was asked to write for a local culture television program on K-Broad TV. And then after her tenure during this, she returned mostly to teaching.
That's such an interesting little side career.
Yeah, right? I mean, we love women with range. And you know what? She's not done yet, because in 1968, she helped to establish the first bilingual theater in El Paso, Los Pobres Bilingual Teatro, or theater. It is with this company that she discovered her love of playwriting. And The Day of the Swallows is actually her very first play.
Oh my God.
Which, for a debut...
Oh my God, I'm shaking.
Coming out with the big guns.
That's
right
nuts.
out the gate.
I also really want to highlight that she was like in her 40s when she started writing, and I feel like that is important to outline. It is never too late to start an artistic career. It is never too late to discover a new path. It is never too late. All those people who are like 30 under 30 lists, you can be 40 years old and write your first play, and then
and have it be incredible.
40 years later, a bunch of people will read it in New York and be like, people should study this, please.
Honestly, true facts. She also wrote a few other plays, one of which we read in consideration for this year's list, a play about Sor Juana.
We did.
That was also quite good. very much, I would say, in a very different style and subject matter. I would say like characters certainly felt similar, but was definitely Girls Got Range, like we said. And then in 1975, she published a novella and a collection of stories entitled Reign of Scorpions and Other Writings, which is a great title. And this work earned her a Premio Quinto Sol Award that same year, making her the first woman to ever receive it. Yes. And so she just continued writing and publishing novels and teaching until she died in 1998.
That's so recent.
I know.
It's so wild.
It's so recent, but it also was almost 30 years ago.
I really like this project because it allows us to sort of highlight and discover writers who I think frequently when we talk about the sort of like famous playwrights throughout history, it is the people who like were winning Tonys, we're getting produced on Broadway, we're like having a full-time career as an artist, which I think is not how a lot of artists actually live. Of like most of the artists I know are doing a lot of different things for economic reasons, but also for like other interest reasons. And so I just really appreciate when we're able to celebrate writers who like were English teachers and, you know, had a radio show in addition to like, you know, being super published and talented and all those things. Like I appreciate the breadth of experience that these women have of like, we have Tony Award winners on this list. And then we also have people who like spent their whole
Lived
life
their
in
lives.
Texas. And like, that is the sort of story that you don't see highlighted a lot of the time in like an artistic success story. But
Oh, 100%. And I
clearly
think
this girl
also,
is artistically succeeding.
yes. When I 100% agree with you, especially because I think that's very much on the nose of like this idea that if you are an artist who's going to make good art, that is the only thing that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly doesn't have to be that way.
No, clearly you can teach for 40 years and have 6 kids and host a radio show and also make good art. And that is a really beautiful, valid, full, rich life. Shout out to James Labella, our dramaturg, for doing that beautiful, beautiful little intro.
Absolutely stellar. I remember when we all read it, we were like,
No notes.
that's the pitch. Got it. Word. Love it.
Dum dum.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for joining us for this episode of This is a Classic, the Expand the Canon podcast. Learn more at expandthecanon.com.
And if you believe in the importance of expanding the canon, which you totally should, please give us a 5-star review and subscribe to this podcast.
Oh, yeah, baby. Subscribe. And then hit that share button and forward it along to a friend, colleague, professor, closeted ex,
whoever.
your creepy uncle.
He could learn some stuff.
He could learn.
For info on what's up next with us, you can follow us on Instagram
at Hedgepig Ensemble Theater,
Facebook
/ Hedgepig Ensemble Theater.
Or you can join our mailing list, subscribe to our list, and download many of these scripts at expandthecanon.com.
You can also support this effort by donating at the link in the comments below. Again, I'm Gagarin.
And I'm Sky.
Bye.
Bye. So good. So normal and not annoying.
Certainly not.